J.D Vance's Hillbilly Elegy is a best-selling memoir, which rose to popularity in the early years of the Trump era. He was at the time received as the political darling of the left, explainer of the white working class, and the resident Republican in liberal media. He is now reviled as a sellout and dangerous. I like a lot of his ideas. I wish he had a few more though. Vance's biography tracks his family story as they move from rural Appalachia to the then Steel Belt and now Rust Belt town of Midtown, Ohio. The pages are a treatise on the ways in which the upward social mobility of a family are hampered by intergenerational trauma, addiction, poverty, and culture. Vance admits that the biography is not so much a dissection of the problems, but a true story about what the problems feel like when you were born with them hanging around your neck. Despite this noose, Vance managed to beat the odds that he outlined, attending Yale and now being the nominated Republican senator for Ohio. Despite many of his views on education, Vance is not a neoliberal. He is a conservative, Trump-endorsed senator who sees the source of many social ills in the breakdown of the conservative institutions of family, marriage, and religion. Here in Australia, the institution of marriage and religion have less institutional value, as the government supplies a more formal safety net. My own state of South Australia, however, has suffered from many of the social ills of Midtown Ohio, places like Whyalla and the outer suburbs being referred to as the closest thing Australia has to a rust belt. With the hollowing out of the well-paid manufacturing jobs of the 80s, the brain drain of the shelved University City scheme, and the attendant ageing of its population, Vance's memoir provides some extreme insights into the effect that environment can have on both aspiration and community. Vance describes many barriers to upward social mobility within his life, but the one that features on his TED Talks and talking head appearances is predominantly a lack of social capital. Vance writes, "There is enormous value in what economists call social capital. The networks of people and institutions around us have real economic value. They connect us to the right people, ensure that we have opportunities, and impart valuable information. Without them, we're going alone." We all have a social network, made up of close and distant ties. Moore et al. Distinguish that it is the weak ties that have the greatest relationship with social mobility, as they represent access to novel forms of knowledge and group membership, or, as Vance writes, opportunity and information. Higher social economic status is generally related to a larger amount of these distant associations, whilst lower status correlates with a larger number of close ties, such as family and peers, who represent a lower diversity of social capital, and thus less social mobility. In studies of poor neighbourhoods, fewer close ties are actually found to have a positive relationship with upward mobility. This reflection is borne out by Vance's own experience, as he never lacked community, but he reflects that only when he became alienated from his traumatised family did he have the space to focus at school. As Moore et al. Point out, not all social capital is good capital. What is relevant for Vance's critique is when you squeeze out your social network, how much power inheres within it. The ways in which social capital correlates with aspiration is important, as the concept of mastery or self-determination is similarly correlated with the broad, diverse, weak social networks that Vance lacked. The second arm of Vance's critique of aspiration within Midtown problematizes most social problems as a combination of this social capital deficit with individual characteristics. Whilst barriers to upward mobility such as nepotism within the legal community may be institutionalized, these problems are rarely seen to inhere within the institution. Vance is instead seen as lacking information and opportunity, the only two requirements for a functioning educational system within a neoliberal educational model. Vance outlines, teachers were unable to shepherd as the students were being raised by wolves. This presents both the deficit view of a child's background but also a failure of imagination about what a teacher can be and where they can stand within the flock. Humphrey outlines that social inequality begins with the family. It is schooling which formalises, certifies it, structures and entrenches it. In a review of non-dominating discourses in Australian educational settings, Humphreys emphasises that dispensing with deficit understandings is the first step towards an ethic of care, which expands the roles available to both teacher and student within an institutional setting. An obvious critique of this perspective is that it fails to teach students the language of power, the sets of values and norms that are privileged in settings such as a law firm. Scholars such as Devlin and Collier and Morgan address this concern, promoting models of joint venture, whereby institutions can bridge the gap between students' backgrounds and the professional world. Vance describes a professor who wouldn't deign to review his work, terming it remedial. Would it not be better if that professor had a worldview in which a disadvantaged student could arrive in the class and present as disadvantaged? Vance doesn't really go into the potential positive and transformative impacts that education may have, but it's pretty understandable considering the social problems that he describes, many of which relate to the economic failing of the Rust Belt town that he lived in. From where I stand, there are different takes on this. Neoliberals will see this as a problem with stubborn human capital not moving west. Conservatives will see this as a problem with globalisation, the loss of nationalist protections and unskilled work. Progressives may see it as a problem with poverty, to be alleviated by government programs. Whatever your take, it seems to me that Rust Belt towns are an inevitability. There is an argument that Midtown has already died. It doesn't mean that people don't live there. Even if everyone was a hyper-rational, market-driven actor, humans are never going to be able to move as quick as capital, nor will they necessarily want to. Similarly, welfare is not a panacea in a society that derives meaning from work. Vance's grandfather made good money, but he still beat his wife. In any of the utopias that the different political perspectives present, there will be a larger role for education to bring meaning to people's lives, to instill feelings of mastery, to provide alternative ideas for the ways the world can be.